G'day guys. Bart was interviewing a lady today, and she was basically talking about all these sort of tapeworms and all these sort of other stuff that they sort of populate your body and intestines and can really make a havoc through your body with they can actually build up ammonia and stuff like that. And that was a sort of an issue, and it definitely is. There's some research that I sort of came across. I'm just going to run through this. I'm not going to basically just to make a point. And so basically some of these pathogens like the malaria one and stuff like that can actually build up ammonia in the brain. Not a good thing, you know, in that regard. Quite toxic. It increases oxidative stress in the cerebral, in the brain. Also causes energy defects. It does affect mitochondria. That's why ammonia does. If it builds up in the mitochondria, it can produce problems. I'm well aware of that sort of that sort of research, and that's really, you know, with people that have got like psoriasis of the liver and problems like that, fatty liver, and really severe sort of cases where you really the pathology is quite bad, and you can actually have buildup of ammonia, which can be a problem. This was a good sort of piece of work that was actually done, and this looked at these sort of parasites as well and production of ammonia. The interesting part was that I noticed on this one, talking about the production of ammonia is difficult to find amongst the various studies of amino acid metabolism in protozoa. So we're looking at different organisms, different parasites and all that. And sort of the literature is all over the place. A lot of people sort of blame, oh, you know, amino acids. If you do consume them, you literally have to go on a low protein diet to eliminate the problem. You know, they looked at, you know, several studies suggest, you know, that maybe, that's the word, like maybe, that catabolism of arginine to ammonium is important in the growth of these sort of parasites and all that. They actually produce a lot of this sort of stuff, but you know, it's still up in the air about exactly. They looked at all the amounts that were, you know, being produced. They were giving them different sort of, you know, there were different food type sources and stuff like that. But their sort of conclusion was, without going right through this whole, which is 30 pages, which I'm not going to do. I'll provide the links. People can just go away and look at them. These amounts are similar to those reported for metabolism of carbohydrates by these organisms. The reality is when you look at these organisms, they are opportunistic. They're going to use anything, you know, and you can't fast forever. They'll even, as that lady said, they'll even eat their shit to survive. So, and they'll start eating you up to survive. So that is not an option. But she was right about one thing when she talked about bile, and bile basically playing a very low. I've talked about, you know, the importance of having antipathogenic bacteria like the acid-loving, which is basically Reuteri, the Bifidobacterium infantis and stuff like that, that they have a cleansing effect through the actual gut. And also the bile that flows through also can have a cleansing effect, and getting all these little parasites out of the small intestine is where we absorb most of our meat, most of our nutrition, fat soluble vitamins and all that. So good bile flow is very important. And she touched on that, and that's in the literature all the way through, that it's really good in that regard, that you basically deal with having good nutrition. So I would basically supplement heavily taurine to get basically the acidity of the stomach really low, to improve the acidity homeostasis, which basically means you're going to be killing any parasites, including H. pylori and many others, in the actual stomach itself, which is the first stage. And then the second stage through the small intestines, where you absorb new nutrients with good bile flow. You're going to be basically eliminating a lot of that problems, and by having beneficial bacteria that survive, that are more acid loving, they will basically fight back and keep these under control. Then you've got ammonia. obviously, you've still got ammonia. So even if they're in the colon, not really causing you malnutrition or problems, they're still causing you problems in the colon in that regard, and they're still building up ammonia. So this study looked at the taurine transporter deficiency impairs ammonia detoxification in mouse liver. So they actually had an animal model. Obviously, you can't deliberately cause a taurine deficiency in people to determine whether this will happen. I mean, obviously, you've got to do it in a mouse model, and it's unethical. You know, not like the good old days. You know, you can do all sorts of experiments on people, both legal and illegal ones. So yes, we won't go there. Very nasty times, especially in the 1930s and onwards from there and into the war years. Yes, a lot of very nasty people doing very naughty things. Yes, so basically, having liver that's impaired and deficient in terms of taurine can be a problem. Now, this actual taurine transporter, I've talked about it before. It is taurine dependent. Taurine transport undergoes an adaptive response. So this is sort of the taurine transporter mechanism of regulation. Adaptive response to changes, critical word, changes in taurine availability. So it's really, unlike most amino acids, taurine is not metabolized or incorporated into protein, but remains free in the intracellular water. And that's why it actually stays in water, the intracellular water, not only of our cells, but, you know, and it gets utilized, but also in those intracellular fluids and the, you know, sort of the osmotic effect. I've talked about that before. So, but also in animals. So when you eat an animal, you know, if you want to preserve, don't overcook it to death, or basically, you know, for too long, and you lose a lot of the fluids and potentially lose quite a bit of the taurine as well, which is really important. Well, you could overcook your meat and supplement taurine, unlike what our ancestors did, which consumed a lot of raw meat plus, you know, mildly cooked, medium rare and rare in most cases, is what most tribal populations do. So they retain a lot of the taurine in those fluids in the meat. But anyway, beyond that, the critical thing is most, and also most amino acids are reabsorbed at a rate of 98 to 99%, but reabsorption of taurine may range from 40 to 99.5%. So as you can see, you know, as you know, where you've got the reabsorption, you know, going through kidney types system, where you've actually cleansing out the fluids and stuff like that and the blood, you basically recycle not only most of the actual aminos, but also you're recycling, you know, so also the sodium and uric acid and stuff like that accordingly. But when it comes to taurine, there can be quite marked reabsorption. Now, obviously, if you've got bigger, better functioning kidneys, and as I've said, remember the rat study that we actually looked at, the high protein stuff, I'll stick that up there as well so people can go and take a look at that. But really big kidneys from a lot of protein actually build really strong kidneys that are able to cycle far more. So if you're basically a vaginarized person with very small, inefficiently functioning kidneys, not only are you getting very little from your diet, not only are you synthesizing very little, but on top of that, because you're not providing the key amino acid methionine to basically provide for that conversion. But on the other hand, also, you're not basically recycling through the renal. So renal adaptive regulation of taurine transporter. Anyway, so basically your kidneys, and that is a big issue. But I'm not going to go into it because the purpose of this isn't to go into the regulation and all this of these transporters. It's just basically to indicate to you people that, you know, ammonia buildup, there's going to be always parasites and stuff like that. But one thing that I actually noticed, remember talking to Mary Ruddock, you know, the kids that were coming back from basically they're on a kibble diet with seed oils and all that really had difficulty dealing with parasites. And the thing is, if you've got good levels of taurine in your system and your gallbladder is working properly and all that, it's kept under control. The reality is we're always exposed to parasites and all sorts of things coming in from the environment. Humans have been dealing with parasites for a long time. If you remember the video that I did about the Tetsmani people, which had very low LDL because they were constantly fighting, their immune system was constantly fighting parasites. These people were massively infected, but had no health problems whatsoever. They had all these parasites, all these there's different sort of worms and stuff like that in their body, and they were still able to deal with those because they had good vitamin D levels and they had good taurine levels. And so even their T cells were really working well in combating and keeping under control these parasites. So, and their macrophages working well, and also taurine plays a really good important role in some of the modulation and also the mucosal type stuff as well. So, which is really important in basically having really good, properly functioning, and also has an effect on balancing out the gut microbiome as well, bringing more homeostasis, which I'll discuss in a future video in terms of that it will relate to the importance of gut microbiome and taurine. So you'll have a better understanding than what I'm saying now. But really fundamentally, when we're looking at species appropriate diet with vitamin D and sodium, sodium's really important as well, can actually mean that your digestive system works properly and you don't get these massive sort of problems. Unfortunately, the ones that were actually getting the really bad problems amongst the Tetsmani people were the ones that basically were not constantly hunting like they traditionally did, but they were basically mixing. It actually shifted their diet slightly where, yes, they were eating quite a bit of animal food, but they also were eating some plants and stuff like that, and probably not getting sufficient taurine levels to basically, but still strong immune system, getting more than enough just to keep it all under control, good bile flow. So it seemed to work for them in that regard. But it's really interesting. These populations are very highly infected with worms and stuff like that, but seem not to have the pathology that we have. I think there is an importance in maintaining a good microbiome. And I think that the future video that I'll be making, you'll understand how this comes about, the importance of specific nutrients to bring this about that basically sorts a lot of these problems out. I don't necessarily think that these organisms that have been part of our environment, like they are for the Maasai, like they are for the Hadza and many others, they seem to basically, their bodies seems to be able to have a good enough immune function. T cells seem to play a very important role. Again, vitamin D and taurine playing a role there. And it seems to basically be the thing that actually is providing good functioning of the immune system, good functioning of the body. I think the biggest problem nowadays, most people are kibble eaters, very poor diets. And even that lady is only very recently sort of moving on putting some species appropriate foods. She's still on a mixed diet of some sort or whatever. And I think that is also going to play a role in how successful she is. And she may even have, bile flow issues. She may have underlying gallbladder issues, stuff like that. We're talking about people, and we can actually see this. I always say to people, look at what Mary said about these children that came back from the schools that weren't getting the sun exposure, that were eating this kibble, refined stuff and all that, and how quickly their gut microbiome degenerated, how quickly they lost some of that protective sort of ancestral food and sun combination. So there's something to be said about basically maintaining a sort of a much cleaner, if you've got those issues, much cleaner ancestral diet with vitamin D. So it's really important. And you'll actually even see that basically a number of parasites and stuff like that, vitamin D deficiency is very much tied into it as well, because it's part of the immune response. So there's plenty of research in there as well on that if anybody goes away and searches for it. But I think a species appropriate diet and the sun are going to really give a strong immune system. I've provided all that information before. I'm not going to repeat it. And then these things can modulate much better the way organisms are operating inside and keep them under control, keep the parasites down in terms of numbers, suppress the sort of numbers that are actually expressing in the organism. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. See you.